Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. By a show of hands, if you can use the raise your hand function in the GoToMeeting platform, can I see if you can hear me okay? Lovely. Okay, awesome. Another question. Did everyone have a chance to work on their stuff from last week? So we talked about the fund list and budgets. Has anybody had a chance to do that? Okay, some have. Good. I do see that there's one question here that I've got from the chat box that pertains to some of the previous webinars we've done. It's a really good question. So I want to address that to everybody. And the question was that I had mentioned that assets minus liabilities equal your net assets, which is in turn your funds. So, what if you have assets for your building and equipment, fixed assets and things like that? Do we need to set up a fund for those assets? The answer is yes. Everything that you have is accounted for within a fund. So the value of those property items are still accounted for within a fund. Some people will have a fund set up like their building fund where they have mortgages and things might come out of, and then that's also where they have the value of those items, those fixed assets. Some people have it in their general fund. Some people will have a fund specifically for only their fixed assets, like a property fund or something to that effect. So it's kind of up to you how you want to handle it. But when you're in the setup process, you will have to state which fund, and I'm actually going to show that here. I'm going to zoom in just a hair for you here. You will have to show, we haven't got to the beginning balances yet, but I'll kind of give you a little preview of that. When you're picking out those fixed assets, you'll have to show which fund does account for that. So yes, great question. Okay, and I'm going to reintroduce myself. I know many of you have already heard me say, my name is Carrie. I am with Icon Systems. This is our accounting setup webinar series. This is webinar number 3. If you have not watched the first 2 webinars, they should have been in the emails I have sent out. Otherwise, please let me know when we can get those sent out to you for review. All of these webinars are being recorded so that you can rewatch them at a later time. If you haven't been working along with us doing the setup, you have those videos to reference when you are ready to go ahead and do that. The goal for our webinars is to give you these little bite-sized chunks for you to kind of work on without having to feel overwhelmed and do everything all at once, and kind of spell it out and make it easy so that you understand, not just what to do, but why we're doing it. There was something else that I wanted to add myself, um, in addition to like last week's webinar, that if you are coming into IconCMO from a for-profit system such as QuickBooks or Quicken or Sage or something like that, your funds are usually what's entered in your equity section from that previous software. Churches don't have equity. In a for profit standard accounting system, a company is going to have equity accounts, which reflect the ownership of the company and the current year's profit and loss. The current year's profit and loss is typically reflected in a reserved account called retained earnings. And at the end of the year, the retained earnings are transferred to the respective owner's equity accounts based on their percentage of ownership. This zeroes out the retained earnings account and allows the new year to start at 0. In a nonprofit fund-based accounting system, the funds will hold their balance at the end of the year. So that is actually, I kind of paraphrased, um, from our Fund Accounting 101 setup guide. So that should be found in there. I have added that as a handout to today's webinar. when I email out this recording, I will include those. Otherwise, you can always find that guide right here under the Getting Started in IconCMO. There is a Fund Accounting 101 for IconCMO down here that has a lot of fantastic information, especially for people just coming into um, fund accounting, but even those who have used another fund accounting system, this is helpful for how does IconCMO handle that. So today, our goal is to talk about the donation funds and how they link to the accounting. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about setting up vendors for banking, and then vendors for AP, and then customers for AR, and then a little bit about the difference between cash and accrual-based accounting. So let's start with the donations piece first. So the donation funds are under donation, funds and donations. So this screen's going to pop up. I'm going to hide our little side menu over here. So this screen's going to pop up, and I've already got some donation funds listed. I've gone through and added those. If you're not familiar with adding those, super easy. You just click on Add a New Fund. It goes ahead and puts something in the list here for you. I'm going to delete that one that I added because I don't want an additional fund. I have everything set up that I want. So we've got them all set up here. And these funds do not have to be the same as your funds on the accounting side. These funds are the funds that the congregation can donate to. They're the funds that are going to show up on their donation statements at the end of the year. So if they donated $10 to the general fund, they're going to see $10 to general fund. If they donated $20 to your missions, they're going to see $20 to missions. So their donation statement is broken up by what they donated to which funds. So these funds are going to be the ones that are going to show up on the statement. They do not necessarily have to be a one-to-one with your accounting funds. The accounting funds, which are the ones that we found under general ledger, fund maintenance. So you had your list here of the funds that we set up in a previous webinar series. So the accounting funds are the ones that the church uses to track how the money is coming in, going out, where it's held, and where the money is owed to sometimes. So the donation funds, for example, like I have two different memorial funds. I had two congregation members that passed away this year, John Doe and Mary Smith. So I have a separate donation fund for each of them that people can donate to separately. However, on my accounting side, I only have one called Memorial Fund. And so when we're going to be linking so that our donations will go into the accounting side, because that's one unique thing about IconCMO is that we actually have the ability for you to enter in your donations and just send it over to accounting. It's very smooth, easy process. There's just this one-time setup part, which is what we're doing today. So if you are looking at this fund list and you do not see these columns that say accounting fund, checking with debit in parentheses, and revenue/liability with credit in parentheses, these three columns, then you will want to click on the three dots and make sure that you have those columns selected. I'm actually going to go so far as to get rid of all the other columns that we're not working with right now. So I'm only leaving the fund name and those three columns. Okay, so fund name and column for accounting fund, checking, and revenue. So to set this up, I'm going to go capital campaign. That's going to go, I'll just say into my building fund and into the savings account. And it's coming over as I have offering revenues. We're getting new church windows, so that's also going to go into my building fund, and I can put that money into a different account. So if you have multiple checking accounts, so notice both of these two things filter up into my building fund. They're going to different bank accounts, and I can even put them with different revenue items. So this is me saying that every single time somebody says that they're donating to my church windows, it's always going in my building fund on the accounting. It's always going to be deposited into my general checking account. And I want to track every one of those donations to that fund with this stained glass revenue item. Um, I think I've got missions for this one. And so you'll go through and you'll set all of these different, that's not what I wanted to pick, sorry. You'll set up all of these different donation funds. You'll get them all set up. And sometimes, notice right here that instead of a revenue, I marked a liability. So this is money that we are gathering up for things like the hurricanes that go through and the communities that they affect. We're not taking that money in for the church to use for our purposes. We're collecting it and then we're sending it out in a lump sum to whatever organization is going to take those dollars and use them. So I don't want to count it as revenue or expenses in my system. I am just counting it as it's coming into a liability account for me to hold that money until we're ready to send it all out. So I've got that liability set up here. And I can do the same with, like I've got a food pantry. I'll probably do the same thing with that. I'm going to say general fund on that one. And I've got, we'll go with world hunger for that. There's my memorial fund. I sorted funky here, sorry. So I'm re-switching it back so that it doesn't keep jumping like that. So I'll pick these different accounts and we'll just say these are offering revenues. I'm just going to complete this all except for, oops, I'm going to leave one undone so that we can see. I'm going to show you an example of how this goes over into the accounting side, and I will show you the effects of not having the setup complete, just so that you get an idea here. Okay, so that's everything. The only one that I have not filled in here is the missions. So when we get those all filled in, how that plays into the accounting side. So when somebody's adding in their donations, and I'm just going to grab a couple of weird things here. So I've got one for general fund, we'll say $100, and I'm going to put another one in here, and that one's going to go to the food pantry. We'll say that's $50. I'm going to do one for my building fund real quick here. Let's see what went into my building fund. I think my parking lot support, I had my building fund. We'll say that was $200. And then I'm going to pick that missions fund because I know that that's the one that didn't get filled in. And we'll see what that looks like here. And we'll say $250 there. Okay, so my batch is done. The person who's entering in your donations goes through all that work and they close that batch. So the first thing you'll see here, and all of mine are like this because I just set up my link to accounting, is that it says, hey, do you want to send this information over to the accounting? I'm going to grab this one here, not the one I just did today, and I'm going to send it to accounting. Oh, I guess that one had some funds in it as well that we're not supposed to. So this is the error you're going to see. Error, posting is aborted because the following funds are missing the information for the link to fund accounting. So that's what we're doing right now is the link to fund accounting. And then it gives you exactly which fund is missing that link. So I would know that I need to go back up here and say, okay, well, I got to complete this. Even if you had part of it done and not the rest of it, you're going to get that same error. It needs to be completely filled out all the way through here. So I will go ahead and fill that in. And now I can send them to accounting. And just like that, so I clicked the send to accounting, it creates a batch for me, for my accounting of where everything is supposed to go. It breaks it all out to the right bank account. It breaks it out to the right revenues and liability accounts. It breaks it out to the right fund. So that is the purpose of doing our link to accounting, setting that up so that you don't have to duplicate and enter everything into donations and then turn around and then enter it again into the deposit side of the system. You can do it all in one shot. You enter it here and then you just say, yep, I'm going to send it to accounting. And if something changes, because if anybody's familiar with the donation side of the system, you can go into the donation batch and you can update things. So if I say, oh, well, this is actually only supposed to be $25, not $250, close out of it, the system recognizes and says, well, your donations batch and your accounting batch are no longer in sync. So please update the accounting entry. And it gives you an are you sure you want to? So yes, I'm sure I want to. And then when I go back in here, you can see that it has updated that dollar value and everything for me. So it's a really smooth connection from the donations to accounting as long as you get this setup piece here. Another thing that you may want to use a liability for, I just want to point this out because this is a pretty common scenario, is that if you have pledges in your church, so people are pledging, they're going to donate X amount of dollars for this year for this fund. So if somebody has already fulfilled their pledging, let's say for this year, for 2023, and they would like to go ahead and start donating to next year to fulfill their pledge for next year, um, people will go in here in the donation screen into the next year, 2024. It should copy all of my funds over and all of my accounting links. So all that work I've already done in the previous year carries on over. Of course, if you need to update or change things, you can do that here. But for example, because it is not 2024 yet, and somebody is going to donate to, let's say, my general fund, I am going to change this to a liability. Actually, it looks like I don't have a prepaid liability set up yet. So I would go back to my chart of accounts and add a new account. I'm going to call it a liability. It's going to be an other current liability and an other miscellaneous. And I'm just going to call it my prepaid liability, or I could call it my prepaid pledges. And I don't even need the word liability because that'll come up. So prepaid pledges. So if I go back into this donations window, so 2024, and somebody's donating to my general fund in advance. So let me look up that prepaid pledges liability. There it is. So add a new batch. The person's going to go in and say, okay, it still has today's date because they're still giving in this current year. The fiscal year will still be 2023, but I'm under the donation year of 2024 because that's what they are donating toward. So I'm just going to say they're giving $50 and I'm going to pick that general fund. So again, the date that they gave was 2023. It's going to hit my bank in 2023. It's going to go on their donation statement in 2023. It is just going toward their pledge for the fund in 2024. Okay. So I'm going to send that to accounting. And again, we can see it's got a liability. Now, what I would do with this is I would go on until the end of the year, leaving this as liabilities over here, leaving everything here as is. And then once January hits, then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to make sure that this goes to my regular revenue. I don't want it to be a liability anymore because now we're in 2024 and I want to recognize things as a revenue. But I would also want to make a journal entry then to take this liability amount, so $50, and move it into revenue. And I'll just quick do one so you have an idea of what that's going to look like. Oh, got ahead of myself there in my typing. Okay, so recognizing revenue, that's what I'm going to call it because then I would know exactly what that's for. Um, and I mean, if I really wanted to, I could go ahead and do this now because in our system you can post date or predate things. So I could go ahead and do this. Um, and I'll say it was, I guess I'd have to look at what bank account. So the Wells Fargo savings account. No, I don't need a bank account because we're going liability, prepaid pledge. And if you've never noticed in our system, we have these little cheats where there's a little minus and a plus that'll tell you which will increase or decrease that account. So I want to decrease my liability now by $50. And then revenue, offering revenue. I'm now recognizing that as $50 in offering revenue as of this date. And then I can go ahead and post that entry. So that's kind of how you would handle prepaid pledges. That's why you would have it as a liability account within the system when you're setting up that funds and donations, a link to accounting. Like I said, once you set it up, it's good, except for in these scenarios where you might have those liabilities that are going to switch over if you've got those like prepaid pledges and things like that. Okay. Um, let's just checking to make sure there's no other questions that have come in yet. Okay. Um, so I'm going to move on from the donations to accounting piece. And we're going to go over to the vendors section. So general ledger, um, I'm sorry, not general ledger, AP, which is short for accounts payable. You're going to go to the enter and pay invoices screen, and there is an add and edit vendor option here. You don't have to add in the vendors before you are ready to use them. But if you wanted to, you absolutely can come here and add in your vendor. So it says right here, add a new vendor, and I can just put in the name of my new vendor. So we're going to say, I think I already have Amazon in there, so let's go Best Buy. I think those are all obsolete nowadays, but that's okay. So we're going to put Best Buy in there. And if I wanted to, I could put in all this extra information, but the only thing that is required is the vendor name. It might be helpful if you're planning on physically printing and mailing checks. It might be helpful to have those address fields filled in. There is a place down here to put in default expense and default fund. You do not have to fill those in to continue. If you don't fill them in, your first check that you write in the system to that vendor will kind of set those defaults for you. And I also want to point out that there is a track 1099 feature here. This is always automatically set to yes, unless there's some reason that you want these people omitted from a report that you can get a 1099 report. I say there's no harm in leaving it as yes. It's better to have it marked as yes and then come back and change it to no later than vice versa, I think. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and save that vendor. The alternative to doing it right here, just like this, is when you're actually in the banking, enter transactions, I'm writing a check, I'm going along, and if I have a new vendor, let's say Barnes and Noble this time, I can see right here that it says, oh, click here to add a new vendor. So just like that, it takes me to the same screen and I can save and close. So I don't have to go into that AP screen, but if I knew that I wanted to update any information on my vendors, that is where I would go, is under this AP, enter and pay invoices. Here's the list of all of my vendors. There's an edit icon to the far left for each of them. Now, if you are a cash-based accounting and not accrual-based, the vendor information is the only thing that you're going to use this AP for. You would not use it to add in invoices, post payments, things like that. You would only use it to add in the vendors and update the vendors. You can come in here and get like vendor activity. This is really handy where I say, oh, I've paid Of course, I don't have any transactions to any of these vendors yet, but I would be able to click on them and say, oh, here's my list of everything that I've paid to this vendor. Plus, we have some reports where we can come in and get like your vendor 1099 report or vendor balance details, things like that, so that even if you're not accrual based accounting, you can utilize those functions. Um, that brings me into let's talk just a little bit before we move on with the rest of the vendor talk here about the difference between accrual and cash based accounting. If you don't know what kind of accounting is in your bylaws, you should probably ask. Most churches, I would say, are cash based, but definitely not all. Um, the difference between the two, and generally, I would say, before I say that, generally, I would say the larger churches end up being more accrual based. Um, but again, it's not a one size fits all. That's not standard. It's just kind of what I've seen most in my experience. Um, so if you don't know, I would ask. But the difference is that accrual based accounting recognizes the expense as soon as they receive an invoice from the vendor. So if you've got a vendor who invoiced you today, but the bill is not due for 3 more months, so you don't plan on paying them until sometime in January, it doesn't matter. Your expense is recognized immediately. So your revenue and expense reports are going to show it as soon as that invoice is entered into the system. If you are cash based, you don't recognize the expense until you're actually writing the check. You write the check and send it out, that's when your expense is recognized. Or when um, money leaves your account. If it's not a check, if it's for something else like a EFT payment, or if it's a um, cash that you have. So it's money that's already like en route to somebody else. That is when the expense is recognized. Okay, so that's the difference between cash-based and accrual-based accounting. So if you are accrual based, you can see that there's the ability to enter in those invoices and then you're going to post the payments to that. You will not use the banking enter transactions and then writing a check function. If you are accrual based, you will not. If you are cash based, this is where all your transactions are going to take place, is under banking enter transactions. Okay. Um, then for the other part of accrual based, accounts receivable. So that's our AR right here module. Very similarly, you're going to go to invoices and payments, and there is an add and edit customer function up here. It works just the same as the add edit vendor. So I can put in a name here. I'm just making things up. Again, I can put in information, address information, there's email information. So if I'm sending out invoices, I probably want one or the other of those pieces of information. And then, there's kind of some other extra information you can put in here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and save it. The other setup item for accrual based or AR is that you also need items to add to those invoices, and that's here directly below your add edit customer as add edit items. So depending on what you're invoicing for, maybe it's preschool tuition. So you're going to put that as an item. What is the typical dollar amount? Keep in mind that this can be changed per invoice. This is just like your default dollar amount. And then what revenue account is going to be tracking that for your invoice here. Add another item. If I'm selling t-shirts, I can put stuff in here, things like that. So you get those items set up, you get those customers set up, and then you can carry on with creating invoices and things like that. Okay. I'm just looking over my notes to see if there was any other last pieces of information that I want to send to you for today. If anybody has any questions, now would be a fantastic time to ask those. And it can be whether it's in regards to something we talked about last week, something from today's webinar, um, something even that we haven't talked about or haven't mentioned at all, go ahead and send those questions to me in the chat box. Otherwise, you're welcome to also email them to me at the end of the webinar or talk to our support. You can call us. Everybody can answer questions. Um, I did just have one question come in that says, can I enter pledges for 2024 before starting using GL? Absolutely, because your donations side of the system you can utilize without doing anything in the accounting. So I'm going to come back into the funds and donations screen, and I'm going to change up what I have for my columns. I'm just going to reset to default. Okay. So this is my default, and you can see there's a column here that says pledges. So if I'm in 2024, um, you can see I've already got pledges listed here, and I don't have anything. Well, I have one that I entered in here for donations. That was the prepaid that we just did. So you can go ahead and click on, so if they were pledging to the church windows, you click on that dollar value, that brings you in here, and you can go ahead and start putting in people's pledges. Okay. You can do all of that donations. In fact, when you're doing your different setup pieces, you can kind of do anything really in the order that you want. The one thing you kind of have to save till the end because it needs to pull from the other areas is that beginning balances screen that pulls in from your chart of accounts and fund list. And then in your donation funds, if you were trying to set up the accounting link, so those funds that we just talked about, that would pull in from the chart of accounts and fund list as well. So if you didn't have either of those two things filled out, you wouldn't have any options here, but you could still come in and utilize the rest of the funds and donation screen. So the pledging and the donating, you just wouldn't have the link to accounting. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining me again today. I will send out another email with this webinar and more information. And we do have one more webinar in our series next Tuesday at 2 o'clock Central Time. And we're going to be talking about that beginning balances screen. And I'm also going to talk about how to link to bank import to pull in those bank feeds. And we have a new payroll module coming up. So I'm just going to chat just a little bit about that. Um, and then that will conclude our whole entire webinar series. So thank you for joining me today. I hope I see you next week. Send any questions that you have to our support. And again, if you don't know where that information is, you can always find it in the upper right-hand corner of IconCMO under Help. There's our email address and our phone number. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.